we're going to jump into the story from Jody so we can better understand exactly what's going on with your case and what you're experiencing in these universities. So I'll lay it out. I think most people understand wokeness, critical theory, which is not just race theory, it's also critical gender theory. They seem to be formless in a sense, like the rules don't really make sense. They just want you to bend the knee and adhere to their strange subjective reality. It's resulting in overtly bigoted and racist policies, which in my opinion, violate the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So for me personally, one of the reasons I supported Trump in this election cycle, in this past election cycle, was because of his executive order banning critical race theory in the government, as well as contracts with companies that do this. Because I've seen firsthand what happens when you implement these neo-racist, neo-segregationist policies. Universities are creating affinity groups. They're telling all the white people to segregate and all the black people to segregate. And then it creates very strange problems with whether or not Asians are minorities or they're white and privileged. So you've experienced this firsthand. And first, just tell me the story and whatever detail you want to tell us the story where you ultimately resigned from your job because I guess they were being racist to you for being white.
Yes, that's accurate.
All right. Thank you for telling your story.
That's a good story.
Come on. So what happened? Where did you work? Smith College. What's going on?
Smith College. So I started off at Smith as a temporary librarian, working in the library as an outreach and engagement librarian. And I was hired to do, kind of out of the box things to engage students who otherwise normally wouldn't engage very deeply with the library. And almost a year after I was hired, or 6 months after I was hired, I was tasked with doing a wild and crazy event for 600 first-year students. And I decided, and I was given a big venue, and the people who gave me the venue said, we will give you this venue if you do something wild and crazy because these kids are going to be exhausted. This is the 6th day of the event. So you got to agree to that. So I did, and I thought, and I have a musician background, so I thought, well, what's the best way to transmit a bunch of very boring information to a bunch of 600 first-year students? Obviously a rap. So everyone knew I was going to be doing a rap. I spent months preparing, working with musicians, getting everything set up, the sound and everything, and simultaneously I was up for a permanent job at Smith College. So I worked all summer on this, and then something happened at Smith. On July 31st, 2018, a black student accused a white custodian of engaging in racially motivated behavior against her. She was in a house that she was not supposed to be in. It was over the summer, and the staff there had allowed her to be in the house, but this custodian didn't know who she was. She was lying down in this living room, couldn't see her very well, and this incident's been documented quite well now in a recent New York Times article. Ever since that incident, the college immediately, so the student...
That was like 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was in 2018, July. She made a Facebook post. So she didn't even file a formal complaint. She simply posted about the experience on Facebook and said that this was just another example of a pattern of systemic racism she had experienced at Smith College. So the college immediately sprung into action, announcing profuse apologies to the student and to the student body, and announced its intention to launch all these initiatives and committees and conversations and dialogues to combat this issue of systemic racism at the college. And this was before they'd even conducted any investigation into what had actually happened that day. So they did conduct an investigation, a very thorough one, and they found that there was absolutely no evidence of racial bias. And anyone who is privy to the facts of what happened that day and has read this investigatory report, it's 35 pages plus 130 pages of exhibits. I mean, it was really thorough. They would be hard pressed to argue that this was an incident of racial bias.
That in and of itself is insane. That a woman was sitting down she was in a closed dorm. A janitor saw her and said, "Who's this?" So instead of confronting the person, which could have been a bad call, he called a cop. The cop was very polite. There's video of it where he's just like, "How's it going? How are things? Sorry for bothering you." And that warranted an independent investigatory body coming in, a 35-page report.
35-page report plus exhibits, floor plans, audio recordings. They investigated phone calls to campus. This was campus police, so unarmed, It wasn't like the town police. This is campus police. A guy who'd been working there for 35 years. His name's Robert Young. Beloved, spotless record. He showed up, and he actually, I think he recognized the student. I heard he recognized her, and she was able to stay. So yeah, they really, it was like they were really trying hard to almost to prove that it was, in my opinion, almost to prove that it was, and they weren't able to. The outside investigators said this is not an incident of racial bias, and yet they proceeded with all these initiatives, and
it's almost like it didn't matter what the event was. They wanted the anti-racism, which is just a name, by the way. They wanted the critical race theory policies in the school, and it sounds like they knew it was bunk, but they needed a pretext. And even though it was proven bunk, they moved forward anyway.
I think that's an accurate analysis.
So what ended up happening to you then?
So what happened to me was, meanwhile, I'm in the library working on my rap. And so this happened on July 31st, and the orientation I was doing was happening in very early, like right after Labor Day. And so within a week of me doing this huge thing, organizing an event for 600 people, it's no small undertaking, I was told, my supervisor came in and said, you can't do this, you can't do a rap. And I said, why not? And he said, because you're white, and it would be seen as cultural appropriation. So
did you try identifying as not white?
I did ask. I said,
You really
no,
did? I was kidding.
I didn't. I said, so if I was not white, I said, if I was a person of color, and I didn't indicate what color. I said, if I was a person of color, would I be allowed to do it? And he said, yes, without hesitation. So obviously just anybody except for somebody who's white.
What about Eminem?
Ooh.
Did you tell him that?
Yeah.
Well,
One of the most
Eminem's a white
prolific,
supremacist dude.
prolific actors of our time.
Yeah, seriously.
Or
You mean
rappers
musicians?
of our time, rather.
I'm kidding, by the way.
He's
He's
a
not
good
a white
actor, too.
supremacist.
Well, I mean, yeah, people say that, Macklemore, and of course, Tom McDonald. But I mean, really, rap is an American. It's an American art. It's culturally American. I think that's my view.
I don't understand
But
why we all can't just appreciate. You know what I mean? Like,
It's actually like racist of me to try and play that game about what about a white guy who did it too.
And
like, you're right. It's an American art form.
who invented the
It is.
guitar? Where did the guitar come from? Huh?
Good question.
Who's using that? Or keyboards? Or turntables?
Jeez,
Who invented the
Middle
record
East?
player?
Yeah.
Or the lute? Everybody,
Tesla? I don't know.
look. This is why I'm like, this stuff's really scary because it's kind of obvious. Let me ask you: your supervisor who came in and said you can't rap. Is this like a middle-aged white dude?
He's a white dude, but he's not middle-aged. He's younger than me. And he was actually the head of the search committee for the job I was up for. So it was very awkward.
Oh.
And
So, was he woke?
I think
just a
he's
coward.
towing the line.
So coward? He's
I'm
you should don't answer that. Don't answer that. I personally do not respect individuals who would say something like that because I think what he said to you was extremely racist. Extremely racist.
But it was so unhesitating. I mean, the manner in which he said it, and then followed up by an email. He memorialized this in an email, in writing. And then I went to the dean of the libraries and I said, what's going on? And she actually said to me something that was a veiled threat. Remember, I was up for a job, and she said, well, how you manage to be resilient in the face of this situation is really going to give us a lot of information in light of your candidacy for this job. It was something like that. I'm paraphrasing.
Wow.
So, I mean, to me, that's a veiled threat. And so the fact that they did it so blatantly and explicitly, I was genuinely confused. I was like, because when I heard about the student, all I heard was a black student was just lying on a couch in a house and somebody called the police on her. That's terrible. Like, that was the narrative that I heard. Right. I didn't really go, because there was no investigation. That's what the college told me. I really didn't have reason not to believe them at that point. So I was confused. I was like, well, this really feels like racial discrimination. He literally told me, because you're white, you can't do this job opportunity. And I wrestled with, well, should I file a complaint? I was like, but can white people be discriminated against? Like, is that possible? And I thought, well, gee, if I report it, I'll never get a job here because white people aren't supposed to complain about this stuff. They're not supposed to do that. And so it was a very hard for me emotionally to wrestle with what I was supposed to do with that. And what I ended up doing was I ended up leaving the library and moving to a different department on campus thinking that I could get away from, because there was also lots of these discussions and dialogues that were happening even before this event had occurred that I just went along with. And again, I had no reason to believe, oh, there's systemic racism. Okay. And I guess, as a white person, you're supposed to talk about your privilege and that's going to help somehow. So I thought, okay. But inside, it always felt kind of disingenuous.
So you didn't quit at this point?
No, I left. I stayed in the school. Yeah, it's a long story. So I went to a different department, and I didn't know that this department, the Department of Residence Life, is very steeped in the social justice. That's one of its core values. And again, at the time, I thought, oh, social justice. Yeah, I can get with that. I hadn't quite put all the pieces together, and I think this is part of the problem. Is a lot of people are genuinely confused.
You needed to be watching Timcast IRL. Obviously, it's not your fault though. I mean, a lot of people don't know about how awesome. I'm kidding. Continue.
Yeah, I definitely need to be watching Timcast. So I moved into this department, and other things started happening on campus. Like the campus police officer who showed up to that incident was terminated a year later, and this is a guy
for racism.
No, it was for undisclosed reasons.
Oh my God! Wow.
And he was a 35-year veteran, about to retire, spotless police officer. He was beloved. We called him Officer Bob. He was there when I was a student there.
That's a Simpsons joke where they're like, he was 2 days away from retirement. Like they do that all the time. Like the dog gets hit by a car, and like, he was 2 days away from retirement. Here's this cop. I mean, it's kind of. It's parody in and of itself. It's like life imitating art. It's so absurd.
Yeah, it's absurd, and it's tragic. Because the other thing that happened with this student was she made this Facebook post, and then she made she didn't know the name of the custodian. She couldn't identify the custodian who had called campus police on her, so she posted the photos and email addresses of two other unrelated, people who were not involved. A dining room person and another custodian who wasn't even there. He'd left his shift for the day before it even happened. And the lives of those two people were, I think it was catastrophic. One of them, during the investigation, he was put on leave and a paid leave, and he ended up not coming back to the college. He had some pre-existing conditions, and it was too much. He didn't come back. And then the dining room worker was harassed. She got phone calls. She got notes in her home mailbox. Students would whisper and point at her, "There's the racist." She was then furloughed this past summer, and she applied for a job somewhere, and to make up for the loss of her temporary loss of her job at Smith. And the person who was hiring her said, "Weren't you the person that was involved with that student when they called the police?" And she was like, no. She tried to explain, and she didn't get the job. We can't know for sure that she didn't get the job for that reason. But
I would say yes, but what you need to understand, once the word gets out, you'll hear this. Look, I understand you weren't at fault, but we can't have those people coming after us. So I'm just sorry. You understand, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Once you're out there, you are unhireable. And it's not about whether they believe you or not. It's that they don't want you near their company.
So now you're waking up to the realities that are the cult of wokeness, but you still work at the college.
I still work at the college. I'm starting to wake up. I'm starting to pay attention more. Some other things start happening around campus. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I'm trying. I took a lower paying position as doing administrative support. So I was no longer a teaching librarian. I was kind of I thought, I can hide down here. That's kind of what I thought. Very nuts and bolts, getting students their IDs, getting them keys. Very, very solid, practical kind of job. And yet, I was told I had to attend staff meetings where people were talking about identity. There was one staff meeting where we talked about how colonialism, white supremacy, examples of how white supremacy still manifests at the college. And one of my colleagues started banging on the table saying, rich white women. And he was talking about the alums. He was talking about the alums. And so nobody batted an eyelash. I'm like, this feels very this doesn't feel professional.
There was no, did they start banging on the table and chanting "Google gobble one of us" at you, trying to convince you to join the cult? Didn't happen. Anybody who gets that reference, you deserve something. A present.
What is it?
I don't actually get the reference. Thank you, Ian.
It's from the movie called Freaks. I think it's called Freaks.
From like
and
the
there's
30s,
this
right?
beautiful
A
woman.
movie.
She's trying to marry this freak who's got an inheritance. And so all the freaks at the table are chanting "Gooble gobble one of us," but she's not a freak, and so she's like, "No!" and she like runs away screaming.
Yeah, that was me. I'm that woman.
So, but is that how you ended up quitting, or?
No. So then, like, I started gently. I felt gently talking to my supervisors, like, because the other thing they were asking me to do was to support a curriculum for students that was essentially telling students that you can break the world down into two groups of people: oppressed and oppressors. And oppressors are white and everyone else is oppressed. And I felt like that was really such a disservice to students. It made me very uncomfortable. It felt like the infantilization I was talking to Lydia about earlier of students, like telling students of color, like, you can't quite handle the world. And until your white counterparts start talking about their white privilege, nothing's going to happen for you. It was kind of this toxic dependency thing. And I just felt like it was incredibly disempowering to both white students and non-white students. And so I tried to raise this several times with my supervisor. Nothing happened. I finally just was like, I don't want to talk about my race at work. I started thinking, gee, you can't ask about race in a job interview. So how is it that this is a continued condition of my employment? So I was told we were going to go, this is the big event, we were going to go to a professional development retreat on campus. And the first day we would be discussing our identities. So I went to my supervisor and I said, and I knew that meant race because that's usually what it means. And I said, I'm uncomfortable discussing my race at work. And she said, no problem. Just say that at the retreat. So I thought, okay. So I went to the retreat and everyone went around the table and we did the script talking about our race. And it was actually, they wanted us to talk about our race in the context of our childhood, no less. Race/culture. They were like conflating the two. And so I said, I'm uncomfortable talking about this at work. And then a little later, one of the hired facilitators said, I was the only one to abstain, by the way. One of the hired facilitators said, any white person who declines or exhibits discomfort, which I had, in discussing their race when requested is not actually uncomfortable. You might want to feel like you empathy for them, but don't. They're actually doing it. What they're doing is a power play, and it's called white fragility. And so they said this, and my heart just dropped because this was in front of all my colleagues, and that's when a line was crossed for me. Because I realized this wasn't just, you can't just keep your head down and mouth shut in this environment. This is an environment in which now shame and public humiliation is being used as a tool to compel certain behavior. Because they wanted me to talk about my race and they wanted me to talk about it in a certain way. I answered the question authentically, which is, I am uncomfortable discussing my race. And that was not an acceptable response. So at that point, I knew I had to file a complaint, which brings me to filing the complaint with the officer in charge of making sure Smith complies with EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission laws. She has a JD. And when I went to file my complaint, I met with her and she looked at me. She was rather incredulous. And she said, do you believe in white privilege? And I was like, what? And then she said, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was created to protect traditionally marginalized groups of people. So I interpret that to mean not me. And then the last thing she said was, I'm going to have to hire an outside investigator to deal with this if you're going to proceed with filing a complaint of racial discrimination and harassment. And I said, well, why is that? Aren't you the person that processes these complaints? And she said, yes, but this is different because you're white.
She literally said those words.
She literally said those words. She said that twice, two different occasions. And I followed them up with emails, of course, because by now I'm being very careful about paper trail and everything. So I filed the complaint. And I filed it, I think it was probably like a week before George Floyd was murdered. And so Smith went into hyperdrive after the July 31st, 2018 incident with the combating systemic racism stuff and all the initiatives, they went into super duper hyperdrive after George Floyd. And remember, this time, like, we're in a global pandemic. Nobody knows what's going on. Suddenly everybody's like, the college is closed. Everyone's working from home. We're going to furlough all these people. Everyone's worried about their job. And the college comes out with this 4-page document called Toward Racial Justice at Smith, outlining further initiatives, including initiatives aimed at measuring pay across registers of identity. So we're talking about, like, now it's being tied to your job performance. So at that point, I started sending emails to HR and other people asking, can you give me definitions of this stuff? Like, what do you mean by equity, and what does this mean? Because now you're telling me this is tied to my pay. And there was nothing happening. I in the meantime, I was getting invited to white staff only meetings, and being told that letters from the president saying white people are especially responsible for combating racism and doing this work, and we all have to work and do this hard work. And it felt like it was just constant emails and constantly talking about being white and how responsible white people are for all of this racism, and how horrible the systemic racism is, and how I need to do all this work. And by now, it's been made clear to me that it's not optional, right? I mean, they say, well, it's optional, but if I don't go, it's like, clearly that could be interpreted as an act of aggression or a power play. So cut to October, I finally decided that I was in a bad state psychologically and physically, and I decided that my health was, the damage that I was causing to myself by remaining in this environment was worse than what might happen if I made a video about it. So I made a YouTube video, and that actually kind of just blew up. I didn't know what would happen.
Did you quit at this point?
No. You really want to get to the part where I quit? No, not
yeah,
yet.
kind of, I guess. But
sorry.
No, not really. I'm just curious if, like, it sounds. I'll just put it this way: it really does sound like you were constantly being pushed to your breaking point. And from what you're telling me, you're like, they told me I had to say this, and I'm like, wow, surely that made you quit. But hearing that each and every beat in the story, you're like, you stayed through it.
I tried, yeah, because I was going through all the internal channels of trying. I was a good faith effort on my part. I thought, well, surely if I show them that this is wrong, surely they will be like, oh, maybe we should review our policies, or, oh, gee, this is hurting. A staff member is coming telling us this is hostile and she's being hurt. Like, surely we should listen to this person. I no longer have faith in Smith College, but I still had some faith at the time that perhaps, and I also knew I needed to exhaust my internal remedies too. So I made some videos, and I got put under investigation like within a month for an unrelated thing. And then they found me not guilty of whatever it was I was under investigation for. I was a slap on the wrist.
Do you know what the investigation was for?
Yeah. We had received, after I made the video, we received a bunch of emails to my department, to the departmental email, which I respond to. A bunch of people respond to it. And it was like, Jodi Shaw's a white supremacist. She went on Tucker, because I went on Tucker Carlson after I made the video. She's associated with a white supremacist, therefore you should fire her. And so I was forwarding these emails to my personal account because I'm documenting everything by now. And they said one of those emails contained student information. I'm not clear on what they didn't tell me which email it was, and I wasn't able to determine which email they meant. But it was a slap on the wrist, and then it was like, okay. You can come back to work. And I thought it felt like that was a hard choice, whether or not to go back, or I'm not going to talk about there were some settlement negotiations, which I won't get into, but it felt like going back into an abusive relationship. And I thought I wouldn't go back into an abusive relationship. So I can't go back. And that's when I resigned.
I can't believe you made it that far.
I can't either.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat. and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And if you want exclusive members only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.